Hey, happy Monday afternoon. Dr. Alan Christensen here with you for this week's installment on Office Hours Live. Welcome. If you're new here, I do these most Mondays. Seeing folks jumping on already and happy to be with you. When you come on, say hi and let me know where you're from, any top health questions. I'll always have a few topics that have been coming in or that are top of mind that I'll start off the discussion with. And I'll keep an eye out for some of your questions that come in as well. The better questions are ones that are actually more detailed, believe it or not. I can't give personal medical advice or guidance, but I'm happy to give really detailed, useful answers. And if you do ask one, hang out. I'll probably have some follow up questions for you and we can get a bit of a discussion going. I always like it when they come along a bit of a theme, and I'll follow the themes as well. So, thyroid health, uh, endocrine health, metabolism, weight, those are the big things that I can give useful answers for. I'm seeing Jean with us from Georgia. I'm seeing Nori King's been with us before and many more coming on. So, yeah, welcome, welcome. And I'm with you all. Excuse me. I just went for a quick bike ride and breathed in some dust here. So, I'm with you all on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube Live. So, a couple different platforms. And I'll keep an eye out for questions or comments on any of those. Oh, and my dear friend Darcy is here with us too. That's cool. My sister, kids aunt Darcy is with us from Kauai. I hope you're well, my friend. Good to hear from you. And yeah, so a couple of things I had off the bat from things that have come before. Oh, and Joanne's here too. This is fun. Lots of good people here with us today. One question, one comment. Yeah, just something that's going on right now. We're in the middle of a 9-week webinar series. I put together some brand new personalized, customized thyroid specific supplements, and they're all 4 key concerns of thyroid health, like weight, fatigue, antibodies, things like that. And so for 9 weeks, I'm talking about each of those concerns in detail. And I'll talk about the supplements and the roles they can play, but I'll also talk about what else we know about these concerns. For example, tomorrow's is going to be about weight and metabolism. And I'll talk about the ties between that and thyroid disease, things that some top myths about metabolism, things that can work for that, and how nutraceuticals can be part of your recovery. So that'll be tomorrow for the one on metabolism. There's several more coming up as well. You can go to drchristiansen.com and sign up. If you have already signed up, you will be getting notifications about the others. So you're already good. You don't need to do anything extra. But yeah, tomorrow night I'll be talking about metabolism. And this is very dear topic to my heart. It's so yeah, it'll be a fun one, and I'll look forward to that. If you can join on Instagram or Facebook, just like you are tonight, but if you do register, you can join on Zoom. And the perk about that is we can have a conversation real time. I keep some time at the end and try to get several of the questions, and I'll pull you in and we can video chat. So it's a lot of fun that way. So yeah, Nori King's looking forward to tomorrow. I'll look forward to seeing you then as well. Okay. So a couple more things that come up in advance. This one I heard a couple of times this week about millet. And it's funny because I've not thought of it for a little while. And then several people were asking about millet and is it safe for thyroid function? So Rachel sent in a question like this. Leanne did as well. And I think there was one other mention of it that came up also. And it's asked about because, for one, it's a gluten-free grain or pseudo grain. And so those who are avoiding gluten say, hey, is this something I can use? And then people will stumble across some of the lists about goitrogenic foods. They'll think, oh, no, wait, this is listed as a goitrogen. I can't use it, even though it's gluten-free. Well, it's listed as a goitrogen. Now, it barely belongs on that list, and goitrogens are barely relevant. So the short of that is millet is fine. It's a fine, good food option for those with thyroid disease. Goitrogens in geographic regions that have endemic goiter, a high intake of goitrogens slightly elevates the risk of goiter over background. And what that can mean is that rather than a 20% risk of goiter, it might move it to 22%. So our goiter risk is pretty much gone nowadays. We don't have adult goiter as a substantial thing. It does happen, but it's not endemic. And it's not something that has dietary factors that are causal for it in the modern world. And even then, millet has barely any of these properties that are thought to be relevant in the situations in which it is. So millet's fine. Funny thing, it's actually a staple food for a third of the world's population. I didn't realize that, but a lot of folks eat a lot of millet. And a cool thing about it, it's dense in many polyphenols, the pretty yellow color, those are pigments. And the plant foods that are colorful and pretty are good for us. Things that stain are good for the brain and good for the rest of our bodies as well. So yeah, it's rich in those. It's also very rich in thiamine and a couple of other minerals, and it's crazy fast for cooking. A lot of the good whole grain products, they can take some time. Brown rice is going to be 45 minutes to get done properly. But no, you can knock out a pot of millet in 15 minutes, no time. So it goes really quick. Now, the only drawback about millet is that it doesn't keep as well. So it's good that it cooks fast because you pretty much want to make it for that evening. It doesn't work well to make a big batch and leave it in the fridge and have it like batch cooked. That's awesome for brown rice, for quinoa, for buckwheat, but not so much for millet. So make it when you want it. It also is one that doesn't work as well for a hot cereal. So yeah, just a consideration that way. Much better as a pilaf type side dish. It's also really good when you give it a light, dry toasting. So just take it in a pan with no oil or anything and just heat the pan, medium heat, and roll around, keep it moving, and you'll see it just start to get a little more tan and start to get aromatic, and that makes it really tasty. You can then do it with about 2 parts of liquid. You can do a vegetable broth or a chicken broth, and those will give it a little bit more rich taste as well. But yeah, millet's a really good grain. Doesn't cook, doesn't store well. My other favorite gluten-free grains would include buckwheat and amaranth and quinoa. One thought about avoiding gluten, there's many that do well by doing so. However, one thought is that your overall intake of betaine goes down a lot. Betaine is also called trimethylglycine, and that's the main thing we get in our diet that helps us with methylation. I hear a lot of people talk and ask about methylation. In most cases, even if we have MTHFR abnormalities, we can do well if we're sufficient in betaine. Now, the paradox is that 60 to 70% of dietary betaine in the Western world comes from wheat products, not just grains, but actually wheat products. So wheat is the biggest source of betaine in the modern diet. And betaine lowers homocysteine. It protects cardiovascular function, maintains liver and brain function. Betaine's important stuff. So a drawback about gluten-free grains, the biggest ones are going to be corn and rice, and millet, we'll see that too. They don't have much betaine. They're almost devoid of that. But the cool workaround, and even buckwheat, I love buckwheat. It is gluten-free, it's not wheat, but it's also not a dense source of betaine. However, amaranth and quinoa, especially amaranth, really good sources of betaine. So easy ways to work around for our friends who are gluten-free. Keep those regular. You can keep your heart healthy. There was one big paper showing that those who had gone gluten-free had higher rates of cardiovascular death. And it was thought to be from that low intake of betaine from some of those good whole grains. So yeah, quinoa and amaranth are very easy workarounds for that. Lots more questions and comments coming in. Linda's with us from Venice. Welcome, Linda. We got Lexi here from Vegas. We've got most of the country covered now. So good to see that. So the other thing I've been hearing a lot is how can I work with you as a doctor? That's been coming in more than typical lately. So 2 scenarios. The one of which, in terms of medical care, managing medications, like full-on long-term management of one's thyroid disease, this is what our team does at Integrative Health. And I'm the medical director. I oversee them. We do weekly case studies. I'm very involved with that. And these are awesome doctors. They work with people in Arizona, California, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, and Washington. We are located in Arizona, but we can do remote work for those other states. So yeah, the biggest 2 states for us are Arizona and California, but a couple of others are options as well. So yeah, that's that list: Arizona, California, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, and Washington. And yeah, Integrative Health, we can work directly with you and manage all facets of your thyroid care. And that's not me personally, but that's the doctors that I work with and train and oversee. So the other option, which is kind of a seasonal thing that comes up now and then, is thyroid second opinions. And these are available now through April. I've got just a couple more openings, I believe. I'm sorry, March and April. There's none in February, but a couple of openings in which we can talk just one-on-one in person, and we can go through your case in really good details. All that is at thyroidopinion.com, and you can go to the site, just schedule from the site, choose a time and upload your past data, set it all up, see all the details about that. But that's at Thyroid Opinion, and that's a way we can work directly. Now, that one, there are no geographic restrictions. So it doesn't matter which state you're in, which part of the world you're in. We just got someone joining us from South Africa right now. Welcome. So, yeah, from wherever you are in the world, UK, Australia, Canada, happy to help out. So that's that for Thyroid Opinion. Okay, so that was the preamble. Those are the things that I had there ahead of time. And now I'm seeing a lot of questions come in. I've got these in two places. So I'm going back and forth between Instagram and also on the others. So I'm seeing a few. Let me grab here on our Facebook and our YouTube. So here's one, and this is from Marilyn. A question about your nutraceuticals. What kind of large-scale research trials did they go through to prove efficacy? Yeah, great question, Marilyn. So that's something that I'm really excited about with these, is that they have all undergone double-blind, placebo-controlled human studies. So we know they work because we've seen them work. And it's kind of a curious thing because there's high-quality research on nutraceuticals and many facets of thyroid health. There's big studies showing that things can help thyroid antibodies, for example, but no one's really taken that research and used that to formulate products before. Pretty much all the products in the market are things based upon, ideas that we had bouncing around in the 80s or the 90s, but they're not based on human studies and they're not based on current human studies. So yeah, there is an existing body of high quality human studies. Some of which that I focused on were double-blind, placebo-controlled. And that's important because sometimes things happen in ways that you wouldn't predict. So like antibodies, for example, a lot of things are thought to lower antibodies. Well, antibodies bounce up and down. If you watch one person and you check their antibody levels 10 times over a year, you'll probably not see the same reading more than once. And that's just random. So it's hard to say from one person's perspective, this helped me or this made it worse, because it could go up and down anyway. So that's why high quality studies are great, because you can look at large groups of people and see what the clear effect was. And then you can compare that against another group of people who didn't do the supplements and see what kind of changes they had. And that way you can clearly see what was a cause and what was just, random noise. So yeah, I love quality science. And we've got our shopping cart up and ready. And in the training webinars, like tomorrow's webinar, I'll share the actual studies. There's full detailed monographs that are coming out as well. So if you go to drchristiansen.com and just enter in for our newsletter, opt in for that. Right now, I'm sending out monographs that cite all the studies used in the formulation of these. And yeah, I really relied upon high quality human double-blind placebo-controlled research. And it exists, but no one's been using it. So good question, Marilyn. Darcy, excited to hear about the new thyroid supplements. Yeah, thank you, Darcy. I'll talk about those again tomorrow night. We'll talk all about focus on weight, metabolism, and things like that, including those. Okay, lots more good questions. I'm reading these, just kind of choosing back and forth which ones. Okay, so this is just one I want to jump on because this is fascinating. This is from Krista. A question about melatonin. That was my focus on last week's talk, and I won't be talking about that tomorrow, so I'll mention that here. So to open up, close any loose ends. Heard you all said about the reasons why we need a micro amount. What about the doctor saying that as we age, we need more of it to correct age? So, Krista, this is a really good question. There was actually a paper that came out in JAMA last week, the Journal of the American Medical Association, and it showed that lots of people taking melatonin, that there actually are some side effects from it in the doses that are commonly used. Now, the melatonin paradox is that your body needs it, your thyroid, believe it or not, and your pineal gland, they secrete it. Then receptors absorb it, they fit it. When there's a lot of melatonin in your body, your receptors close down and melatonin can no longer get in. Now, that problem actually worsens with age. So we become more resistant to it with age. We do make a little bit less. However, our response to it in supplements and the way that high dose melatonin works badly, that worsens with age. So, Krista, this is another example to where what you're saying is something that many doctors say. I've heard that too, but it's exactly the opposite of what we see in the biomedical research. And this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, is that there's so many good solutions available. There's safe, natural, effective options. And the conventional world often doesn't entertain them. And the natural world often does a really good job, but in many cases they don't. They'll follow things that seem to be intuitive or logical, but not current and not accurate. So as we age, we become more apt to have a high dose of melatonin shut down our melatonin uptake. And that's the big paradox, is that when you take way more than your body would be having any business making, not only does it not work as well, but it leaves you groggy. It leaves you tired the following day and makes you have weird dreams. So there's been so much good research about doses in the range of 100 micrograms being very effective and very safe. But yet all the products in the market contain usually 30 to 50 times as much of that, which is totally crazy. So yeah, they literally have 30 to 50 times more than, not only than is safe, but then is effective. And that's something too, to where it seems intuitive that more would work better, that if a little bit helped you sleep, well, then a lot should just like knock you out. But no, it's the exact opposite. When you go way above that window, it doesn't work as well. So yeah, good question. And it confuses me too. Okay, so here's one. I'm looking back and forth between these different platforms. This one just came in on Instagram with us. Really confused about difference if you get diagnosed with hyper, or autoimmune thyroid diagnosis. What's the difference? Good question. Well, there's differences and there's overlaps. So if you wish to put more details about your diagnosis and your situation, I can even chime in on that specifically. I'll say some general statements. So most thyroid disease comes about from autoimmune disease. And the most common versions of that are Hashimoto's or Graves' disease. Now, with Hashimoto's, the immune system attacks the inner mechanisms of the thyroid. And over time, they just beat it up and the thyroid can't make what your body needs. You think about like I don't know, like if the back in World War II, if the Germans came onto American soil and they bombed the Ford Motor Car factory, they couldn't make cars, right? So the immune system beats up the thyroid. It can't put out hormone. That's Hashimoto's. And when that progresses far enough and that deficit of hormone is now insurmountable, that's Hashimoto's. It doesn't happen right away. So first, when there's less hormone, your body has scores of backup mechanisms. For starters, we make way more thyroid hormone. Healthy people make way more than they expect their bodies to need. And that's why most of it ends up wasted, or a lot of it's converted to forms like reverse T3. That's normal. We have more lungs than we need. We have more kidneys than we need. There's a lot of redundancy. And there's many other ways that we can keep it in circulation longer when it starts to dip. But there's a point at where, that stuff all can't keep up anymore. And too little is just too little. And that becomes hypothyroidism. So the most common scenario is that autoimmune thyroid disease, as in Hashimoto's, can lead to a state of hypothyroidism. Many people have hypothyroidism, but they don't have thyroid antibodies that show up in their blood tests. Most of them still have Hashimoto's, and I can talk more about that, but that's an overview about that side. Now, hyperthyroidism, the most common cause for that, is also autoimmune. But in this case, it's not an autoimmune disease that eats up the thyroid. It's an autoimmune disease that goofs up the doorbell. So the doorbell, in this analogy, your brain hits the doorbell and tells the thyroid to open the door and let out the hormone, right? So if you got a short circuit on your doorbell, you're going to open it all the time, even when you don't need to. And that's basically what Graves' disease is. The immune system attacks the TSH receptor, and your thyroid thinks there's all this TSH telling it to work, but there's no TSH. Your brain is like, what are you doing? Stop it. So it lowers the TSH, but your thyroid still thinks it's there. So that commonly leads to hyperthyroidism. So Graves' autoimmunity typically leads to hyperthyroidism. Now, here's the wrinkle, is that you can be hypo and not have clear signs of Hashimoto's. You can also be hyper in some cases from Hashimoto's. Or you could be hyper but not have obvious signs of Graves' disease. That's a little more rare. There's other causes of hyper, like medications or toxic goiter, but that's basically how hyper, and autoimmunity relate. Hopefully, that was more helpful than it was confusing. But if you wish more clarification, just drop a note and I will do that because this is an open topic we've got going. So, welcome, welcome. Lots of folks are coming on still right now. I'm seeing the group growing quite a bit. So, good to have you all. Office Hours Live, Dr. Alan Christensen here. And just a quick mention that tomorrow night I'm doing an event on metabolism. This will be a free webinar. You can, if you're not already signed up for these, you can go to drchristensen.com and join up for our webinar series. This one's going to be all about weight, metabolism, thyroid disease, how those things come together. And we'll go into that in great detail. Along those lines, someone here's mentioned on Instagram, I have Hashimoto's, had a subtotal thyroidectomy at the age of 23 due to hyperthyroidism. I battle horribly with my weight. So yeah, Kim, that's the thing. And there's such a tie-in between how your thyroid works and how your metabolism works. And that's why I'm really excited to share tomorrow's topic. If you don't mind, Kim, please come join us then and bring some detailed questions. I'm going to save a lot of my talk about that one for that time so I can, because I'm going to go into that in so much depth and I can talk about other things more so tonight. But that happens. And without really getting some of the inside ways to reverse it, people can be on medication and doing all the seemingly right things and not have their weight budge. But we've got some solutions to talk through tomorrow and be happy to have you join us. Okay. So, here's one from Maritza. The Adrenal Reset Diet book says soybeans are not good for the thyroid, but the Thyroid Reset Diet allows for soybeans, which is correct. Thank you. So, Maritza, did I say that in the Adrenal Reset Diet book? It's possible. There was a time in which I did talk about just avoiding soy as a general statement. I never went in a great deal of depth about it, but it was something that I'll plead guilty of going along with the crowd on that one. So many of my thyroid expert friends were talking about avoiding soy. I thought there must have been some good reason for it. Then, over the years, one of my other friends reached out and said, look, here's some clear big benefits to soy in terms of lowering breast cancer risk. Yes, I said lowering breast cancer risk, lowering heart disease risk, osteoporosis, menopausal symptoms. Here's some ways that it really can help. Are you sure that it's harmful for people that have thyroid disease? And I said, I've got to tell you, I'm not. I've heard that. I've seen some things here and there, but I've not really done a deep dive in the primary literature myself. So it inspired me to do so, and I did. And I found there really was no valid case against soy for thyroid function. So yeah, I could have said that differently in the past, but I would not worry about soy. Not only that, but there can be clear benefits. So avoiding it is something that you may be missing out on some other health benefits from that. You Google Alan Christensen and soy, you can see some very detailed blogs I've written about this and all the research and studies that I've gone through. But if it's good enough to know that, then no, it's not something I'm concerned about. It doesn't change thyroid function. Let's see. So many other good questions. I'm just kind of picking this up here. Okay, I want to go deeper in this one. Linda, what is thyroid resistance? How can you have hormones in the blood but not in the cells? So, Linda, this is something that it's talked about in some circles as a bit of a misnomer. If you want to put more details on if you were told you had it, what your situation was, I'm happy to talk about that more specifically. But in general, there are phenomena of deliberate thyroid resistance where when there's too much thyroid hormone, your body gets rid of it more quickly. And that's not a glitch. That's a feature. That's not a bug. That's a feature in the system. So your body has ways to protect yourself against too much. And one of which is your cells become brittle and they stop allowing thyroid hormones to cross inside of themselves. So that happens on purpose. Now, the other thing is there are some exceedingly rare genetic cases in which those transport mechanisms just don't work across the board. There have been a few cases throughout all of recorded history of that. So I don't know if those are the kinds of things you're wondering about. What I have seen, I've seen many doctors argue that people have thyroid resistance if they need a high dose of medicine and a low TSH to feel normal. And that's not how that, I would argue against that as being a valid interpretation. So yeah, if there are more details about your question you'd like to share, Linda, I'm happy to address those. Couple thoughts here. Here's a good one from Joanne. My sister has Hashimoto's like I do. She takes Synthroid. Her recent TSH was 0.26. Her endocrinologist didn't want her TSH any higher. The doctor said she would get heart palpitations. I thought the doctor needed to cut back on her dosage. Yeah, you're right. TSH is too low. Uh, this is crazy, you guys, but it's not that rare that doctors confuse the whole high and low thing about TSH. And it freaks me out, but it happens rather often. So there are times where a doctor thinks, oh, your TSH is low. That means you need more thyroid. And it's the exact opposite, but it does happen. So I don't know if that's the issue going on, but that's possible. Audio note, I just saw someone join that can't hear. I think I'm coming through pretty well. I'm with you guys on this is an Instagram question, but that one's going straight to audio on the iPhone. So please check the speaker on your end. I think I'm coming through all right on that. If anyone wants to give me a thumbs up audio check for Instagram to be sure, I would appreciate that. But I think that one's good. Um, let's see. Here's a great one. Cindy Williams, what if you have high melatonin but are not supplementing? You know, Cindy, I've not gotten too involved in melatonin testing. There's no really accurate way to do so. I know some doctors do it and talk about it. The difficulty is that, I saw a thumbs up for my audio on Instagram. Thank you for that. Okay, so it sounds like I'm coming through good. Yeah, if you couldn't hear me there, just please double check your speaker setup. Um, in terms of high melatonin, yes, there's not great tests for that. It's something that we make regionally inside the brain and we use mostly inside the brain. There are some remnants of that we pee out, and there are some remnants of that in the saliva. But there's a thing called the blood-brain barrier. And what that means is that I never thought this before, but this is cutesy. So your brain's like Vegas, right? So what goes on in Vegas stays in Vegas. The brain is just like that. With the blood-brain barrier, what goes on inside the brain pretty much stays in the brain. So we don't have good ways to measure melatonin in real time in living people. So I wouldn't put a lot of weight on that. Uh, Cindy, if you are signed up for any of the webinars, you can access the past recordings and you can hear a lot of detail about the past webinar on melatonin and when that can be useful. You know, when it's not for everyone, but those who have sleep issues, when it can be useful and how someone could go about using that. But yeah, I wouldn't base its utility or lack of on tests of melatonin. It's not something we can accurately test for. Okay, let's see. So many good questions, you guys. I'm just trying to pick out a couple more that are reflective of many others. Okay, here's a great one. This is a classic one I hear a lot. Curious your thoughts on natural desiccated thyroid and if it may contribute to increases in thyroid antibodies, thyroid peroxidase, or thyroglobulin. Good question, because that's something that is passed around quite a bit in natural medicine. The thought is that if you take natural thyroid, you might worsen Hashimoto's. I've also heard that saying you can't take natural thyroid if you have Hashimoto's for that reason. And the thought is that, yeah, somehow or other, taking it will make your body react against it. And it seems plausible enough. And this is a cool thing, but one of my readers actually tracked down where this came from because I can never find out where it came from. There's really no data saying that. Dr. Broda Barnes was doing a talk, I think it was 93, and he got to mention this in an off the cuff comment, and it was recorded and passed around. And that's where it started. And it's been gathering steam, here and there ever since then. But there's no evidence for that. If you dig in the medical literature, most of the data is rather old. There is one study that's more recent, but there's been 3 studies on that exact question. Does natural thyroid worsen or improve thyroid autoimmunity? And one saw no effect. The other 2 saw helpful effects. And those that talk about helpful effects, they argued that there's a oral desensitization phenomena. So with taking natural thyroid, that by itself contains the enzyme thyroid peroxidase, and it contains the protein thyroglobulin. So the very things your immune system attacks are part of what's in the pill. And think about this like an allergy shot or like taking bee pollen for allergies. When you take things in tiny amounts orally, you can often desensitize to those. Now, in whopping amounts, you can make it worse. Like if you've got a peanut allergy, eating a massive amounts of peanuts won't make you better. But there is research going on tiny amounts for desensitizing. And that's what seems to happen with natural thyroid and autoimmunity. And I've had countless cases over the years when I was practicing to where Someone had very high antibodies and unstable thyroid function, and they were on synthetic medication. We would change them to natural, and their antibodies would be negative and would remain so. So, in many cases, that is corrective, but there's really no good data arguing that it would make things worse. But there is a popular idea bouncing around that it could make things worse. And yeah, that's pretty much the exact opposite of what we know from research and what I've seen from clinical experience. Um, wow. Okay, here's a practical one. Can the thyrotonin and armor be taken at the same time? Well, by the same time, there's two ways of thinking about that. So that could mean here there's both pills, and I'm going to wash them down. So that one's no. And anything you would ask at the same time, like in your hand, in your mouth, in your tummy at the same time, no. But in the same time, people also mean like, can I be on them both, albeit at different times of day? And in that case, no problem whatsoever. So thyroid hormones are microscopic. They're so tiny. So I talked about thyrotonin containing 100 micrograms of melatonin. That's already a pretty small amount. But if you're on a 1 grain dose of Armour thyroid, the T3 in that's only about 9 micrograms. So it's tiny. And if there's anything that's a protein or a mineral or a fiber, you might not absorb it consistently. So it's always best to take thyroid medicine all by themselves. I won't go into a great deal of depth about malabsorption. That's a big topic I could talk about. But you could take both medications, not at the exact same time, but on the same day, if that's helpful. So hopefully that clarified it. So here's a good one I see a lot too. This is a recurrent one. What pathology leads to optimal TSH, optimal free T4, optimal reverse T3, no TPO or thyroglobulin antibodies present, but perpetually low free T3? So, Sean, really good question. You are not the first to ask this at all, my friend. So, another popular idea that bounces around in the natural thyroid space is that your free T3 must be through the roof, or else you're just, you're destined to bad things. uh, yeah, there's a group called Stop the Thyroid Madness. They were behind a lot of this view. They popularized this idea. And the question is, in endocrinology, what's the difference between a healthy person and someone who's got a disease? What is distinct about them? And how can we help the person with the disease be like the healthy person? So, a little more detailed, if we're thinking about thyroid function, how can we help someone who has poor natural thyroid function regain optimal thyroid function? How can they look just like healthy people do? So, one question to answer is, how do healthy people look? What kind of scores do they have? If you take people that lack thyroid disease, that don't have autoimmunity, that don't have symptoms, that don't have life events disrupting their thyroid like pregnancy, what do their scores look like? And it turns out healthy people often have low free T3. They're on the lower side, sometimes even below range. On the other hand, if you look at people that tend to have high free T3, they're not healthy people. They have more problems with mid-body obesity. They have greater rates of cardiovascular death. They have greater rates of cognitive decline and higher rates of total mortality. So, Sean, the pathology is none. There's no pathology. That's actually fine. But there are many arguing you need to have that. But quite frankly, you don't. Healthy people don't. And people that have high T3 are not the healthiest people. So, yeah, good question. Okay, how are we doing here? We've been rolling along for a fair amount. Let me give another couple questions. So here's a practical one from our friend Nori King. Does methimazole need to be spaced out like other thyroid meds? It does not. And that's really a matter of the dosing quantities. So the active ingredient in that is now a milligram quantity. It's generally like a 5, 10, 20 milligram range per day. And that's a whole different ballpark than the micrograms of thyroid medication. So that can be taken with other things. That's not as restrictive for the timing. Okay, so now I'm thinking through other follow-up questions that are raised that relate to things we've already talked about. Okay, Sean, I would love to hear Sean, if you have follow-up comments on this one. How does one accurately diagnose central hypothyroidism? Sean, did someone say you have that, or are you a practitioner? I'd be happy to give a follow-up detail. So central hypothyroidism, there's two kinds of that. There's secondary and tertiary. So primary hypothyroidism is where the thyroid slows itself down. Secondary is where the pituitary has stopped working and quits telling the thyroid to work. Tertiary is where the hypothalamus quits working and quits telling the pituitary to tell the thyroid to work. Now, central disease is quite rare. In the case of hypothalamic disease, that's in that range of like a handful of cases globally ever. It's extremely rare. And it's something to where if you had it, you wouldn't walk around and wonder about it because you wouldn't be walking around. You'd be not functional. Now, pituitary disease is not quite that rare, but it's still pretty rare. And a very popular thing in natural medicine is to overdiagnose pituitary disease and to call things central hypothyroidism when they're not central hypothyroidism. So, Sean, if you want to put more details about what you're referring to, like lab values or whatnot, I'm happy to chime in. But overall, when we see central hypothyroidism, by far the most common cause is pituitary disease, and we would diagnose that by two things. First, we would see evidence of a lack of proper pituitary output. When that happens, it's not just one hormone, not just TSH, it's pretty much all pituitary hormones are off by a lot. The other thing we see is radiographic evidence. A Sella Turcica MRI can show the pituitary is crunched, enlarged, or weird in some way. So that's how we know it's actually central hypothyroidism. And I see that term tossed around a lot in natural medicine in cases that have nothing to do with central hypothyroidism. So I'd be very interested to see if you had more detailed comments you wish to share. I'd be happy to give feedback on that. Okay. So here's a quick one. Sean, you're banging up all kinds of good questions. Sean, please take a look at the American College of Thyroidology. I don't know if you're a practitioner, but these are all things that are very relevant. They're not common questions, but they're common things that do represent a lot of big misconceptions. So I won't jump on the next one, but if you want to talk more about central disease, I'll do a follow-up comment with you on that one. Aesthetic has one. How would you treat a patient with meds who does have symptoms and Hashis and labs are, TSH is 4, so on. So how would you treat a patient with meds? So aesthetic, I'm not quite sure if you mean how would I medicate someone in that case, or what would I do if they're already medicated? Because those are very different scenarios. So if you want to clarify that, I will keep an eye open for a clarification comment from you. Do you mean someone who's already on medications, or would I medicate them, and if so, how? Either question could have been addressed that way. So follow-up to other comments. Here's this one that came up. So Lexi, I want to say thank you for the updated thyroid supplements because it will allow me to save money. So Lexi, you're sure welcome. And this is something to where, these are not discount products. These are the best quality imaginable. But because I was able to make them so specific and targeted, and because I was able to make them for this specific purpose, I could make them also more price competitive. And I did. That was a goal of mine. I was not at all going to cut any corners, but I wanted to see if I couldn't do it in a way to make it more cost effective for people. So thank you for noticing that. And I appreciate the comment because that was really something that was important to me. Okay, so aesthetic follow-up comment, would you treat them? I think you're asking, would I give them medication? At this point in my career, I would not. So there was a large study showing that people whose TSH scores averaged 14 within 2 months could have normal TSH scores just by the thyroid reset diet. This was a study of a large number of people that had had Hashimoto's for many years. They had scores much worse than you're describing. And I wouldn't start medications in a situation like that because, quite simply, this is what you would call subclinical hypothyroidism. That's not overt hypothyroidism. And so part of the answer is there's very strong evidence that medications do not help people with subclinical disease. They don't feel better. They don't have lower odds of getting overt hypothyroidism. They don't live longer. They don't get less heart disease. There's really no improvement for them. And the other side of that is there's easier options available. So the thyroid reset diet's been shown to reverse thyroid disease in those cases by a very high percent of the cases. So good questions. And if you're on the diet, numbers continue all over the place, that can be a time where you get some more direct guidance. The thyroid consult is certainly an option. There can be hidden missed sources of iodine people have. There can be other factors, but all considerations to think through. Okay. Yes. I wanted to get a follow-up from this one. So endo confused by labs while on combo medication, wondering if it's due to central hypothyroidism, low TSH, low free T3, low T4, no antibodies present, below range, reverse T3, how to rule out central. So in those cases, Sean, a big thought is just how does that medication jive with what your body's physiologic needs might be? There's some good calculators I've made. If you do Alan Christensen thyroid calculator, you can easily find out how much hormone your thyroid would make by itself. And if the dose you're taking is somewhere well above that, you'd totally expect to see your TSH suppressed. Now, central hypothyroidism, it would be a low, suppressed TSH, but not just low-ish free T4, free T3, but like almost non-existent free T4, free T3. They're just not present. So that's how central looks quite a bit different. It's also, I don't know your other markers, but if they were to measure things like ACTH, FSH, LH, those are also going to be suppressed in central hypothyroidism. In your case, it's much more likely that you're just on a medicine that's higher than you need. If you want to mention your approximate body weight, gender, dose of medication, I'm happy to just off the hip tell you the ballpark of what that might look like. And if you would expect a dose like you're on to cause your TSH to go low. One more follow-up comment. It's really common at stage 1 or 2 hyperthyroidism to see the free hormones normal or low. And what's happening at those early stages is your body's dumping out T3 and T4 as fast as it can because it wants rid of them because there's too much. Now, if you keep adding to it, there comes a point where you can't dump it that quickly. And eventually they do elevate, but that's only at much later stages. So yeah, Sean, if you wish to give more details, I'm happy to mention that. Okay, follow-up comments, aesthetic. Yeah, for sure. Think through about just hidden sources of iodine. Take a peek at some of the troubleshooting comments I've read, but I've put a lot of content out there about why TSH levels fluctuate. There's a paper called the NDNR, the Naturopathic Doctors Review, and that's coming out in the next several weeks. And I wrote a detailed paper in that about exactly your question, why do thyroid levels fluctuate? So aesthetic, the first thing is be aware of the 5 rules that I've talked about in terms of how to get accurate labs and always follow those. That's the first step. And in many cases, that's the cause of fluctuations. But then there's other steps to troubleshoot, and there's reasons why those things happen. Okay. So I'm going to grab a couple of follow-up questions related to topics that we've mentioned here already. And I'm seeing a lot of folks jumping on. Welcome, Office Hours Live. We're kind of winding down. And again, tomorrow I'm doing a free webinar on metabolism and the relevance of thyroid function on metabolism and ways to help it if yours is not right. drchristiansen.com, got the sign up for that, and that'll be all about weight and thyroid disease. So I'm going to get one or two more follow-up questions. Okay, so here's a follow-up one. Are all NDTs fairly equivalent in quality and consistency? Fairly equivalent's a broad enough term. Yeah, so many are just not commercially available in terms of recalls, shortages, or whatnot. In terms of who's had recalls, who's not had recalls, they always say in the stock market that past performance doesn't mean future performance, right? So those that have had problems in the past, may not have problems in the future. And those that have not had problems in the past still could. But if past performance is any indicator, so current brands of NDT in the market now really include Armour Thyroid and NP Thyroid, also called generic. Armour has had fewer recalls. NP does maintain good quality control in general. They have had recalls in the past. So that's what's there. There is also compounded. I'm generally not a fan unless companies do extraordinary levels of quality control, which I think some companies have done. But overall, they are fairly equivalent. If your concerns are fluctuations in your scores going up and down by big amounts, that's really not going to be a problem with the medication, however, because even when they've been the recalls that have occurred, they've been times in which the medicine has been off by like 13% rather than 10%. So they're not like twice the potency or a third the potency. So aesthetic, if your scores are going up and down a lot, it wouldn't be the medication. If your scores are always stable, you go to refill your medication and they're off by a third, it could be. And that would be like a recall type scenario. Anything more than that, though, you could just rule out the medication variance as being a problem for that. Cheryl, so here's two related ones from Cheryl and Michelle. What is the range of free T3 in healthy people? Cheryl, how do you lower T3? So healthy people show a big range of free T3. They're generally on the lower side, but they can be all over there. And that's really not something that is important to try to push around. There are a lot of authors who have said you must be on the high side of normal. No. Sadly, those who are have worse outcomes, and a lot of science supports that, and it makes sense why that would happen. Okay, I'm going to grab like one more related question if I can. Let me pull this one back out. Okay, so Sean, male, 145. Okay, so this is a follow-up question to Sean, who had really high, very low TSH, and the doctor thought might have had, or someone thought he might have had central hypothyroidism. So Sean, you're a 145-pound male, and you're taking 50 micrograms of T4 and 20 micrograms of T3. So here's some off-the-cuff math. So a guy is going to need somewhere around half to 6/10 of a microgram of T4 per pound of body weight. So easy math, it's your size, that's going to be somewhere around 70 to 90 micrograms is about how much T4 your body would make all by itself. And so, Sean, if you were to have your thyroid taken out, let's say that you were scheduled, well, here, that's not even you. Here, I won't even say that. Let's say you've got a clone, Sean. Your clone's going to have a thyroidectomy, and your clone's going to become my patient. And the thought is, what would I prescribe in anticipation rather than let the person suffer without? So if your clone was to have a thyroidectomy, I would prescribe a 75 microgram dose of T4. I would then test right away and do any fine tuning they might need. And it might not be T4, but that would be a dose equivalent to start. May or may not be perfect, but it's going to be close. So what you're taking is 50 of T4 and 20 of T3. So how do they compare? Well, T3 is probably at least 4 times the potency of T4. So we can say 20 times 4 is 80, and we can add that on to your 50. So you're taking about 130 micrograms of T4. And the T4 is just a handy way to think about what your day's needs are. Again, Sean, your body would need probably about 75 micrograms of T4, and you're taking about 130. So it's no surprise whatsoever you'd have a low TSH. It's also no surprise you'd have low levels of T4 and T3. So that would happen. If you were taking, say, 4 times as much as you're taking, you would have a low TSH, but you'd also probably have high T3 and high T4 at that point. So your dosage, your body size, your labs, they are perfectly normal, my friend. They make absolute sense. And yeah, I would just talk to a doctor that would understand that and not be surprised by that. There's no suspicion of central hypothyroidism from those findings. You could have other completely unrelated findings that would change that, but from your thyroid function and your dose, that all perfectly fits. There's nothing really mysterious about that at all. Okay. Couple thoughts. Okay, so follow-up one. So Tina was saying about the thyrotonin and armor at the same time. If I do happen to wake up 5 hours after taking thyrotonin, you're totally fine. No problem whatsoever to take your armor later on. And that's actually a handy time to take it in the middle of the night. That does fit about what your body's needs would be. All right, let me maybe get one more follow-up one. We've talked about pituitary function a few times. I think I'll close out with this one. So from Bliss, I have, she put in quotes, normal range blood work, but symptoms are in waves. I have a pituitary tumor. Doctors want to put me on meds. What do you recommend? So so the good question is this even a thyroid issue? You know, you can have thyroid symptoms and not have thyroid problems. And that's a very important thing to distinguish. So many things that are not related to your thyroid can cause symptoms just like those that come from your thyroid. That can even happen if you have abnormal thyroid levels. Now, to have a pituitary tumor, sometimes pituitary tumors are compressive. They will squeeze the pituitary and lower its output. Other tumors are secreting. They're causing the pituitary to make more than it should. And other tumors are identified, but they're not really changing things much. So those all matter. And what would be done for that tumor might be nothing. It might be a matter of taking out the growth or trying to keep it from growing, from enlarging. That's all different. And so it's really a matter of trying to figure out what those symptoms are from. And if you've got normal thyroid levels, there's a distinction between normal and optimal one can make. That's really more of an important distinction for someone who is on medication than someone who's not, believe it or not. But I would really think about where else are those symptoms coming from. If they are from the pituitary, that's very important to thoroughly diagnose and then address. But I don't think this really is a matter of thyroid medication from what you described. And again, normal range, even from the worst part of the normal range, you might be bordering on subclinical hypothyroidism. That's where the TSH elevates and the free hormones have not both have the free T4 has not dropped below range. So you got a high TSH, normal or low normal free T4. That's called subclinical disease. And that's a real thing. It can be associated with symptoms, but it's not benefited by thyroid medication. Medication doesn't help it. The low iodine diet does reverse that in a very high percentage of cases, but medications aren't useful for it. Okay. I'm going to go make some pad thai. Sunday I'm getting in the habit of planning out the meals for the week. I'm actually just finishing up the next manuscript, and this is a cookbook. So I've been in the kitchen a lot and having a lot of fun with it. I'll finish that up in about a month, or actually by this month I'll finish it. But I've been doing so many recipes, and I've got this really good rhythm down to where on Sundays I'll map out all the things we're going to have for the week, and I get the shopping done that day or the day before, and I get all the food prep done. A lot of things I even make, like I made a whole bunch of stews and soups and sauces yesterday and prepped up all the veggies and, measured out a lot of various ingredients and stuff. And then the week, it's like just so easy and so much fun. So yeah, for the pad thai, like all the produce is prepped up, the sauces are put together. So now I'm just going to go and warm up my rice noodles, and I've already even cooked the chicken. I didn't cook the shrimp yet or the eggs, but that's about it. So it's going to be super easy and it'll be really good. All right. Hope you guys have a good evening yourself and a good dinner. And yeah, if you're curious about your metabolism, come on, hang out tomorrow night. drchristiansen.com. You can sign up for the webinar series. And this is a series of 9 total talks that are in-depth discussions about the core issues of thyroid disease. And these were really motivated by some new solutions for that. I've made a new line of supplements that are all thyroid specific. They're easy, there are not a lot of pills, they're cost effective, and they're based upon high quality human studies. There's nothing at all like it on the market. Believe me, I've scoured the market for this. These are completely novel. So I'll talk about tomorrow our supplement called Metabolism Boost, and it'll be in the context of discussing metabolism and weight and thyroid and all things we know about that. So come on, hang out. And yeah, you're welcome to be here on Instagram or Facebook for that, but you can also come on Zoom. And if you do, we can do live video chat at the end, one-on-one. So, all right, have a great evening, and I look forward to seeing you all soon. I will be back next week, Office Hours Live. I think the week after that, I'm going to be, if that's the right dates, I'm going to be on a writing retreat finishing up the cookbook. So I'll be away for a little bit. But otherwise, I'll see you guys really soon. Bye-bye. And I'm seeing some comments. I'll see you guys. Yeah, you guys are so welcome. Thank you for recognizing the information, and thank you for thanking me. And I'll see you tomorrow night. Bye bye.